We are live and rolling, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome to the Delta ISB Independent Science Board's June 2023 meeting. We are accepting public comments, so please follow the instructions on your screen and on the meeting notice if you would like to provide written questions or comments or oral written comments on any of our agenda items today. And I'll start now with the roll call, and we'll state our names and if we have any new declarations. Steve.
Steve Brandt, no new declarations.
Virginia.
Virginia Dale, no new declarations.
Tanya.
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Tom.
Tom Holzer, no new declarations.
Anna will not be joining us. Diane. Diane here. Bob.
And no new declarations, and I apologize for being at a Starbucks.
Sorry, Dan, I can't see everyone's pictures. I couldn't see that you were here. All right, sorry. Now, Bob.
Okay, Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
Obey.
Jayanta Obey-Sekar, no new declarations.
Inga.
Inga Werner, no new declarations.
And I'm Lisa Wanger, no new declarations. All right, let me just give you an overview of the agenda. We're going to have a chair and lead scientist report from the Delta Science Program. We're going to discuss the status of our 3 current reviews. And then that includes any public comments we've received before the meeting on the prospectuses. And then we'll prepare for our next meeting. So this is a relatively brief meeting, and we should be able to get through it in good order. Edmund, are there any public comments on this agenda item?
There are none.
Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is my chair's report and business matters. So on April 27th, I attended the Delta Stewardship Council's in-person meeting and presented an update on our recent activities, including recently completed reviews and the new work plan. And as part of that meeting, I had the privilege of participating in the tribal listening session that had been arranged. So I'd like to just provide a quick summary of that meeting. And because I know, many of you have never been in front of the council, I just want to remind you, the council is made up of 7 members. 4 are appointed by the governor, 1 each by the Senate and Assembly, and the 7th is the chair of the Delta Protection Commission. So, some really dedicated folks to achieving the goal of the council, which is to align Sacramento, San Joaquin, Delta decision-making with science. Is there a comment? No, okay. So some things that came up during the meeting that I think might be of interest to the Delta ISB is that we were mentioned prominently in a couple comments. So there's a new Delta Water Master named Jay Ziegler, and he was providing an update on the voluntary agreements and indicated that he found our review thoughtful on how science must be integrated, inclusive, and transparent to assess the voluntary agreements. He basically emphasized some of our same points. The Department of Water Resources provided an update on the Delta Conveyance Project, and the DWR indicated that they will be responding to comments as required by CEQA, including ours, which she mentioned. So it was Carrie Buckman giving this report out. And she also reported that she received 729 letters and other communications in response to the Delta Conveyance Project request for public comment. So I think we will understand why it's going to take them a little while to provide comments on our comments. I think that's probably enough to say for now. I want to spend a little more time talking about what I learned in the tribal listening session. It was really very useful to be part of that council listening group. We heard from 4 representatives of various California Native American tribes, and the purpose of this listening session was to hear about tribal ties to the Delta, their sovereignty and relation to the state, and their perspectives surrounding Delta management. The listening session was personally extremely valuable to me. It really changed my perspective on tribal views and history. And I'd really like to give all the ISB members this opportunity to engage with tribal representatives. And so I've asked Brandon Chapin, who's the tribal liaison, to consult with the tribes about their preferences of how they'd like to engage with us. And folks can also access that council meeting recording to learn more. But I'm just going to summarize a few points that I think are worth sharing because they're particularly relevant to the ISB. So one of the big things I heard was that they prefer to be engaged early in any planning process rather than later, so that they can offer guidance and potential solutions when they're presented with decisions that are mostly formed. You know, they feel like they're always saying no, and that really isn't their intent. And things like when you come in and present them with a map puts the tribes on the defensive. So they really expressed a willingness to be problem solvers. A second point was they welcome opportunities to apply their knowledge, which they call local and traditional knowledge for our benefit about natural systems. And in particular, they highlighted wetland functions and benefits, and they thought their knowledge could easily be applied to wetland restoration and similar activities. And they also mentioned they have native plant nurseries. So that was all news to me. The third thing that I took away was that water quality is a really big concern. One representative said that her tribe invests in their own water quality monitoring and assessment because they want to be aware of what they're being exposed to. They use the tule, the grasses from the wetlands for basket weaving, and they're holding them a long time, and they're putting them in their teeth, and they're eating fish, and they're doing other activities that really expose them to the water quality, and they want to know, what the risks are. And then probably a pretty overarching comment that we heard from all the representatives was that it's just, their words were, exhausting to keep explaining the same things over and over again. Yeah, what we should understand when we approach tribal communities to engage with us is that they're being asked to comment on many, many actions by government agencies. One representative reported that she had 32-hour sessions with DWR about the EIR. And also because of the volume of requests and other reasons requiring written responses to things as a burden to the tribes. So I think, there's a lot to be gained from engaging with the tribes, but we just want to be really mindful of not overburdening them. I'll just pause for a second if anybody has any questions. Was that summary clear? Yeah, okay. All right, well then I'll just move on to the rest of the chair's report. I'm going to attend the council's May 25th meeting and present our recommendation that we agreed on at our last meeting to reappoint Dr. Laurel Larson to a second term as Delta lead scientist. And I'll just remind everyone that advising the council on the lead scientist is one of the important avenues by which we promote the use of high quality science and decision support in this system. And it's also helpful to remember that the first term of Dr. Larson's term as the Delta lead scientist will end on August 2023, and she's unable to complete a full second term, but can serve until June 2024. So at our April meeting, we agreed to recommend to the Delta Stewardship Council to reappoint Dr. Larson to a second term by unanimous vote of the 8 members who were able to participate. So that's coming up. And then also a presentation that's coming up on June 12th at 9 a.m. Jay Lund and Tom Holzer will be presenting their review of the water supply reliability issue to DWR, Department of Water Resources. So folks may want to tune into that. And then the last thing in my report is, since the last public meeting, we've received one piece of public correspondence, which is part of your meeting package from California Water Research on 2023 California flooding. And what that comment was about was provided some writing and research on how flood risk reduction efforts seem to be failing to keep up with the increase in flood risk due to climate change. And so we certainly appreciate that comment and are looking into that in various ways, largely through the DMDU effort, but we'll stay engaged on that issue. Edmund, do we have any public comments on this agenda item?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say there's also a cascading impact of the uncertainty about acceleration and precipitation. And I'll get you a bit more, but I know there's some really good social scientists on the board as well. So the governor has proposed to deal with flood impacts by voluntary diversions through to a groundwater replenishment. And there's some significant issues with that, and that orchards are not resilient to flooding once they've started to bud out and are in leaf. And so the program I've advocated for them to release modeling of the impacts. And it's been very chaotic this year. It hasn't been effective in the Tulare Basin, but they're proposing to allow unlimited diversions to flood flows. There's some trailer bill language, and there's no definition of what flood flows are. It would just be up to a local agency to decide that any structure or road or even just land would be in danger of inundation. And then people could divert to flood flows. And environmental and fishing groups are very concerned about it, and they're opposing the trailer bill language. But it's definitely a situation where the flooding that we've seen so far this year is may affect the Delta, in that if this does pass cumulatively, it could have a huge impact. The flood diversions would be not considered appropriations, and so they would be exempt from oversight by the State Water Board, and it would be returned to the Wild West era before the 1913 Act that created the Water Commission, when people could essentially divert unlimited amounts of water by simply posting a notice on a tree. So I'll get you a little bit more information about it, but there's definitely some cascading impacts of societal impacts of people being very concerned about the flooding, and some just sweeping deregulation of diversions that is being proposed as a result. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Interesting. Any comments or questions for Deirdre? No. Well, we do appreciate you raising that issue. Thank you. Okay, well, we'll move on to our next agenda item now, which is item 3, the Delta Lead Scientist Report. So I'll turn it over to Laura Larson.
All right, just trying to unmute. So hi, everyone. I'm joining you from Colorado today. I'm here for the Community Surface Dynamics Modeling Workshop, and I'm going to start my lead scientist report by turning over the microphone to Kyra Wallace, who is a California Seed Grant State Policy Fellow. You all know her very well. She works within the Adaptive Management Unit and devotes a large percentage of her time to serving as a liaison with the ISB. Kyra is going to be providing you with a recap of the recent Adaptive Management Forum.
Thank you for that introduction. I am just going to go ahead and share my screen. 1 second. Okay. Can everyone see my slides all right? Yes, okay, I see a thumbs up. Okay, yeah, so as Laurel said, I'm just gonna give a little recap of the Adaptive Management Forum that was held on May 4th, so just a couple of weeks ago, and I'll jump right in. So just a little quick background on, oh, sorry, did I hear something? So just a little bit of quick background on what the Adaptive Management Forum is and why it's held. So the purpose is to promote coordination and learning and foster discussions about implementing adaptive management, or AM, in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And this is called for in both the Delta Science Plan and the 2016 Delta ISB Adaptive Management Review, which specifically called for regularly convened AM forums to assist in coordination efforts. So that's just a quick background as to why we have these biannual forums. So this year's theme was focused on governance for adaptive management. And in this case, governance is referring to the structures, processes, laws, policies, and rules that are used for managing environmental and natural resources. And so on the right is just a list of some of the main sort of discussion topics that were used throughout the forum. The first being how to make governance of adaptive management more equitable and inclusive. That was kind of the overarching discussion question throughout the day. Who are we adapting for and why? How can environmental justice and tribal involvement improve? How can the current governance system change to enable more effective adaptive management? And what barriers exist and how can we address them? So that was sort of the different discussion topics that were woven throughout the different panel discussions and speakers. And then in terms of just the key themes and takeaways that were sort of heard throughout the day, first was definitely a clear need for earlier involvement of tribes and local EJ communities in adaptive management processes. That was definitely a key theme that many presenters touched on throughout the day. There was also a lot of talk about building relationships and trust being a key issue that needs to be addressed. Adaptive management is constrained under the current governance system, and this is not a surprising theme. This was brought up in the 2016 Delta ISB review, which identified this as an issue as well. So we're still hearing of this from different stakeholders. And then there was a theme of reaction versus strategic adaptation planning. And this is kind of referring to, under the current governance structure, the decision-making process is constrained, obviously. And we heard from various speakers that they feel like they're having to react to change and sort of play catch up rather than being able to strategically plan for and adapt for these changing conditions in advance. There was a common theme of need for better funding and improved data collection and sharing. And finally, there was a lot of discussion around the need for coalition building and collaboration. So that's just some of the key themes from the day and some of the takeaways. And there will be a day 2. Originally, they were sort of back to back, but they've been separated. So we have a day 2 planned. It'll be interactive activities and discussions to continue the conversation around inclusive and equitable governance for adaptive management. And this is going to be held on June 27th. It will be a hybrid event, so participation online or in person, which is really amazing. And so more information and registration to be released soon, so stay tuned. I'll be sure to share that information as well once it's available. And then if you are interested in watching any parts of the forum, it was recorded, and the recording and summary of that will be posted online soon, so that will be available as well. And there is a scoping potential for a final product, possibly a white paper after the conclusion of the day 2 workshop. So that's something to look out for as well. So there'll be a final product after the conclusion of day 2. So that is all I have. I'll hand it back over to Laurel, and I'll stop my screen share.
Thank you, Kyra, for an excellent summary. And I'm now going to turn it over to the board to see if those of you who attended, such as Inga, Steve, Tom, or Tanya, have any additional thoughts to add. Tanya?
Well, I don't have a lot of additional thoughts because I think Tyra did a really excellent job of summarizing what happened at the forum. I did attend the full forum and then had the opportunity to serve as a moderator for the final panel discussion of the day, which was focused on how we can change the governance system to enable more inclusive adaptation. And I just want to re-emphasize. Sorry, there's the dog. The dog wants to re-emphasize some points too. The point about how we can really think about adaptation for who and how we address the question of equity in adaptive management, I think is really critical for us as a science board. The kind of basic literature on adaptive management has really focused on adaptive management for ecosystem function and for the biophysical system, and we often don't think about the social system. So it's adaptation for who, and also what types of governance processes can best facilitate that type of thinking and that type of engagement with environmental justice communities and tribal communities. So we had some good tips that came out in the presentations, and I just encourage you to look at those or watch the video if you weren't able to attend. That's it. Yeah, my dog's continuing to bark. Sorry.
Thanks, Tanya. Inga has her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I was unfortunately only able to attend a few hours in the morning, but what I took away with me is the plea for outreach to the public, but especially to young people. And clearly, for scientists that often, are stretched very thin, it is an effort to allocate the time and resources needed to do that. So I think more collaboration with people who do that sort of thing on a daily basis is really required, and it should really go into the thinking when planning for a project. That's my main point that I took away. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. And Tom.
Yeah, the takeaway I had reinforces what was said earlier about governance and adaptive management not always being very compatible. And it was interesting that the point was being made by people who are doing the governing that they tend to live in silos that sort of thwart adaptive management. That looks like it's been a long time challenge with adaptive management that probably requires special attention. I don't know, maybe even from the legislature.
Thanks. And I think Bob has his hand up. Bob, you're muted.
There we go. Thanks for the reminder. I did not attend the forum, but I do have a question for Kyra as well as those who did attend. I was wondering if there was any discussion of staff stability and how it might reflect on adaptive management actually being successful. And the reason I ask this is that in places where we have been involved with adaptive management, the most successful ones were situations where there was great stability among the staff for many, many years. And it allowed all sorts of relationships, strong relationships to develop. And I wondered if that was a topic of concern or discussion at any time during the forum.
Thanks for the question, Bob. My recollection is that that topic was not a major topic of discussion, but is certainly worthy of recognition. Kyra, did you want to add to that?
No, I didn't have much to add. Yeah, that wasn't a main discussion point that was touched on, but it is something really interesting to maybe consider in the day 2 workshop.
I guess I would urge you to think about it because in the States anyway, we tend to have a very rapid turnover of our staffs over time, whereas in other locations, especially other countries and so on, the staff may stay in their positions and involved in the AM process for many, many years, and they tend to be highly successful. And I've often thought that that was one of our real shortcomings in the States, is that we do have these high rates of staff turnover and people get promoted or they move on to other positions. And it seems to be a fundamental component of AM that we really don't take very seriously, but it's taken seriously elsewhere. And they've been, I think in many cases, much more successful than we have been. So anyway, I'd throw that out as a topic for discussion in day 2 of the forum next time.
Yeah, and actually, Bob, I was just looking over my notes, and I think I'll elaborate on my previous answer. So there was a panel that was moderated by Nusha Ajami. It was the first panel in the workshop. And one of the things that she kicked off the panel with was a statement about going beyond the mission and vision of individual agencies in order to overcome systematic exclusion. And I had asked her a follow-up question about her thoughts on, or the panel's thoughts really, on whether mission and vision statements should be revisited. And, you know, Ivan Senok, who represents the Buena Vista tribe of Miwok Indians, said that, you know, mission and vision statements are very broad, and maybe what we really need to do is just take a broader interpretation of what those mission and vision statements are to be more inclusive. And while he was talking about this, he urged, he and Nusha actually both urged agency representatives at the meeting to really think deliberately about making leadership representative and to make these broader interpretations of mission and vision statements more structural, so that these inclusive processes aren't really just being propagated by one person at an agency. Rather, you have a leadership that's representative of the demographics of the area, and a history of interpreting mission and vision statements in such a way to really make inclusive processes more structural. So there was a little bit of discussion to that extent, which I think is related to your question about turnover. So like if we have rapid turnover, one mechanism to make these changes lasting is to really institutionalize them.
Okay, that's a good start. Thank you.
You're welcome. Obi?
Yeah, no, I wonder if you could clarify something. I was curious about this question that came up, you know, adaptation for whom? I was wondering, does it mean that there is some kind of rethinking going on? Because in the original laying out of the adaptive management plan, I assume some of those were discussed early on. And I was wondering, why is there a question now on adaptation for whom? Was that not thought about originally when, you know, on the beginning of the project, or, you know, conditions under which you would, let's say, change operations or other factors?
So I think there's growing recognition, Obe, that there are certain community groups that have been excluded from planning processes and excluded from the types of outcomes that are quantified in association with these projects. And so one of the things that I've heard repeatedly about from tribal communities is that tribal beneficial uses aren't adequately taken into account in assessments of the costs and benefits of these projects. And these groups, including EJ groups, are not included at early stages of the adaptive management planning. So I think there is growing recognition with the environmental justice movement and you know, with our reckoning with the systemic racism that pervades our governments, that there is a need to be more deliberate in thinking about who is included in these processes.
Understood. Thanks.
You're welcome. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, I'll move on to the next segment of my report. And I'm going to keep this pretty brief today. Mostly, I want to bring some topics that have come to my attention as potential future agenda items for the ISB to your attention as well. And the first item relates to a project that is taking place under the umbrella of the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program, CSAMP. Now there's one management goal that CSAMP has proposed for Delta Smelt, has institutionalized for Delta Smelt, which is to reverse the trajectory of the Delta Smelt population from one in decline to one experiencing overall increases within 5 to 10 generations, with the long-term aim of establishing a self-sustaining population. To achieve this goal, CSAMP members will work collaboratively and with urgency to prioritize and implement management actions that are targeted at known or hypothesized stressors, habitat needs, or other critical factors affecting Delta Smelt populations, and to learn through implementation. And this is a goal that was endorsed by the policy group in October of 2019. As an outcome of that goal, CSAMP has formed a technical working group that is advancing a structured decision-making process to address the question of what are the best management and science actions to advance CSAMP's Delta Smelt management goal in consideration of uncertainties and trade-offs with other socioeconomic and environmental objectives. That technical working group has undergone its first phase of the structured decision-making process and has been making presentations and doing outreach to various groups on the findings. And one recommendation at the early May policy steering committee meeting is that they should be doing broader outreach, including to groups such as the Independent Science Board. There is an underlying motive behind this additional outreach in that the group is considering whether they should be doing a second round in the structured decision-making process, and they would like some feedback on that. So Bruce DeGeneiro, who facilitates CSAMP, had reached out to me asking whether there would be interest among the ISB in receiving a presentation from that group on what they've been doing, what they've been learning. I would note that this may be of interest. It might be relevant to the DMDU review that you all will be talking about a little bit later today. So I'll turn it over to you to see if there are any comments, to see if there's interest in getting this on the agenda for a future meeting.
Yeah, Laurel, I'll just say that, structured decision-making and fish management are clearly issues that we're focusing on right now. So even though SDM isn't exactly the same as DMDU, it's certainly in the umbrella of things that are related. So yes, I don't think there's really any question that would be interested in such a presentation. So Steve.
Great.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Laurel, is there any document or plan or something we can read ahead of time?
So this was something that was asked to Bruce specifically in some emails, and he said that they're not yet at the point of having a specific product to share or have reviewed, but they do have this presentation that they would like to provide to you.
Yeah, I'm thinking particularly along the science aspect of it. In order to try and improve the Delta Smelt population, you need to have some idea of what you think are the critical limiting factors in setting the population and restricting the population now. And so I'm wondering if they have, clearly they've thought about that. I'm wondering if there's sort of a reference document that they're using to prioritize their actions or something like that.
So there is one publication that I would recommend, which is related to this project, which was a publication by Hendricks et al. I believe the year on that is 2022, although I need to check my source. It's a paper that I presented to the Delta Stewardship Council last month, and it's a really interesting paper in which the team of investigators essentially relied on several decades of fall midwater trawl data and associated environmental data to test alternate hypotheses about what might be the critical limiting and interacting factors controlling occupancy of delta smelt. So whether they're present or absent at particular locations within the delta. And the way that they dealt with the big data challenge that they had, and just the possibility that many of these environmental variables were related to each other, is that they undertook a participatory process in which they went to different groups of delta smelt experts in various agencies and academic communities and asked them for their hypotheses, their alternative hypotheses about the processes and drivers that are controlling delta smelt presence or absence in particular locations. And then they constructed statistical models to test those hypotheses and evaluated them. So the tests were done in a Bayesian framework and evaluated the models in terms of parsimony and performance. So that is a reference that I can provide to you all as background reading in preparation for this presentation. I think it may be included in your meeting materials as well, since it was part of my recent lead scientist report to the council. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I'll move on to my next item, which is also a heads up about a possible future agenda item that I would cover with you all. And it pertains to the Delta Science Strategy, which has been a topic of ongoing conversation between the science program and the Delta Independent Science Board. We are gearing up to update the 2019 Delta Science Plan. And in fact, that update process will be part of our 2024 work plan. And as preparation to update the Delta Science Plan, we've been having a lot of internal conversations, in part motivated by the earlier conversations with the ISB on updating a Delta Science strategy for the science community, so broader than the Delta Science program. As a part of this process, the Delta Science program has been holding a series of just internal workshops to ensure that we're on the same page internally before we go to the external community. And within those internal workshops, we've been reviewing science strategies for other science communities, such as Tampa Bay, such as the USGS. So we're looking at a mixture of communities and specific agencies. And we've been evaluating vision statements and strategic goals that are a part of those science strategies. We still have a lot of work to do internally to really coalesce around where we want to take the possible drafting of a new science strategy for our science community. But one helpful way that we've been structuring our thinking is through the identification of a set of 4 grand challenges associated with the Delta science community and associated key barriers to those grand challenges. And the 4 grand challenges are challenges that a smaller group of us, really, including myself, came up with after review of documents in the literature that are fairly high level and visionary and focused on Delta science. And this includes many of the documents produced by the Independent Science Board, many of the calls to action that came out of memos produced by the Independent Science Board. I think the time is right for us to bring these grand challenges to your body for some feedback, as well as some feedback on the approach of using these grand challenges to really shape our strategic goals and potentially the vision of where we're going with the update to the Delta Science Plan. So I just wanted to propose that as a possible agenda item, maybe in your summer meeting, probably in the July meeting or a little bit later. So any thoughts or comments?
Well, I'll just start out, Laurel, that oh, it's great to hear that you've been listening to some of the things we've been saying. I'm sure you also are, seeing issues that you want to address on your own. But yeah, I mean, we can ask the rest of the board, but I suspect they will be, hugely interested in that discussion. And because we have such an interest in how the Delta Science plan is developed, and because it feeds back to so much of how management is done. So yeah, absolutely. We would, I think it's fair to say we would be happy to engage in that conversation.
Great.
And the more you can send us ahead of time to think about it, I think the better the conversation will be.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to provide you with some written materials that have been motivating our conversations internally.
That would be great.
With the acknowledgement that since those materials will be made public, they are a draft.
Okay, right. That's true. But maybe we'll get some good public comments too.
Yeah.
Any other comments from the board or ways you'd like to see them prep us for that conversation? I guess that means we are in agreement that we do want to hear what you're thinking. So great.
Great. And then this isn't on the agenda, but I'll just say very briefly that I am currently at the Community Surface Dynamics Modeling System meeting in Colorado, where I was asked to provide the opening plenary about the modeling efforts that are underway in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta region and some of the thoughts that I have about building a collaboratory. So it was a really great opportunity to present what we've been thinking, to present some of the details of the proposal that Ted Grantham at UC Berkeley is leading in collaboration with many agencies, including the Delta Stewardship Council. And I would say that the presentation went over well. I focused quite a lot on the need to engage in a fully participatory and inclusive process in building this collaboratory and in generating alternative water management and operational scenarios, and really understanding the trade-offs associated with those scenarios. And so, some of the ways I think that this presentation resonated with this particular community is through the focus on human dimensions modeling and on systems that are really driven by human management actions. This Community Surface Dynamics Modeling System community is a community of an international community of Earth surface process modelers. And what I've seen is that there's a lot of interest among students in making those models and the application of those models more relevant to policy and management. So I think that human dimensions aspect resonated well. The importance of participatory research and inclusiveness is also something that resonated well, because in the next 5 years of the CSDMS effort, the area that they're really going to be building out is inclusive science and participatory science that reaches a much broader spectrum of community groups and people in comparison to the past. So those were the areas that really resonated. I think one of the challenges that we hold in common with that community is the challenge of long-term sustained funding for such an effort. But this is also a challenge that I'm gaining some ideas about by being here. Just before this meeting, I attended a presentation by a program manager in the NSF geoinformatics program area. And it was encouraging to see that NSF has a lot of opportunities right now that are related to cyber infrastructure and fair and open science. I did learn that 2023 is a federally recognized year of open science, which is defined as the principle and practice of making research products and processes available to all while respecting diverse cultures, maintaining security and privacy, and fostering collaboration and equity. So that's all very encouraging to hear. And I'm going to use the rest of this meeting to network with colleagues and explore some ideas about how, some additional ideas about how we might get a collaboratory funded within the Bay Delta area. And that concludes my report.
Oh, that is great, Laurel. Thanks for all that interesting update, and good luck at the meeting. We understand that you won't be able to join us for our whole meeting today since you'll be engaging in that science meeting. So, but we do
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time to brief us before you go to learn more.
We do have a public comment.
Okay, so we have a public comment. Let's hear that.
Yes, we have a public comment from Deirdre Desjardins, who would like to comment on diversity, equity, and inclusion on adaptive management. She wanted to provide it during the AM forum topic. But I do want to clarify for the public that for agenda items, we are taking public comments at the end of the agenda item, but please send us an email if you feel your comment is more timely, if you present it earlier. Thank you. And sorry, Deirdre.
I wanted to let the record reflect that during the discussion of inclusivity and in the Delta Science Program and the adaptive management, I raised my hand to comment and was just not recognized by the Delta lead scientist. And I found this to be systematic. I got more involved with the Delta Science Program and the Delta Independent Science Board in 2020 when I realized the funding crisis. But it's not just environmental justice groups. It's not just, there is a framework of power in California water. And I've talked about this before, and it determines who is entitled to respect and deference, who has priority of access to resources, who has epistemological and moral authority, and who determines the frame of reference. And it's never NGO groups. It's never the fishing groups I work with. And I've had trouble, I'm even trying to find out about the Delta Science Advisory Committee, which is a standing quarterly committee. I was told I had to do a Public Records Act request to find out anything about it. Similarly, with the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee, I indicated my interest over a year ago. I've looked at issues in both hydrologic modeling and the climate modeling, worked extensively with environmental and fishing groups, looking at their interests. And there's just absolute barriers to being included in very critical conversations. The same thing with the technical advisory group for the Delta Salinity Management program. There's nobody from NGOs. And although the consulting with a white woman who allegedly represents environmental justice groups, this person has been a real gatekeeper with the community groups I work with in the Delta. They aren't consulted. Positions are taken which are sometimes very harmful for them. They're not treated with respect by this person. And I would like to see a process which is truly open and which truly finds community leaders, and which also is open to experts who work with these groups. That this is not it. And in the process of consultation where there's individual interviews and they're summarized is far too limiting, and it's far too structured, and it pushes towards outcomes that are predetermined by a steering committee. And one shouldn't have to work so hard to try to find, try to have some reasonable amount of input in scientific and technical issues that shape the entire discussion. And there are many critical issues for climate change not just for environmental justice communities, but for every other stakeholder in the Delta. So thank you.
Thank you, Deidre.
Yeah, thank you, Deirdre. I understand that you're expressing that it's not only EJ communities who may be disenfranchised, and of course these are very difficult issues that are part of the governance processes that we don't directly deal with, but we understand this issue of there are those with local knowledge in and outside of the EJ community who are having trouble getting that information to the right people. So thank you for that comment. Okay, so now we'll move on to our next agenda item, unless there are any other comments from the board. No, okay, well, Tom, I'm going to give you a heads up and I'm about to hand things over to you. We're on to agenda item 4, which is the subsidence review, one of our 3 review activities that we'll be discussing today. And Tom will be describing the public comments that we received, and we'll have a discussion of that as well as taking any new public comments. So Tom, take it away.
All righty. The draft prospectus is out for review with a deadline for comments by May 31st. And it's been fairly widely circulated. And we also took the initiative of sending it to individuals that we thought would be interested in it. So far, we've received 3 comments from Matt Lees, a PhD candidate at Stanford, Tom Zuckerman, who's a farmer in the Delta, and Dennis Baldacci, a professor at Berkeley. And I will go through the comments. Matt had several just editorial comments, and interestingly, they were involved material that we had trouble writing to begin with, trying to keep it brief but still clear. So it's pretty clear we have some more clarity to inject into the prospectus. He also provided some helpful recommendations for Dutch experts who have been involved in rewetting efforts in Holland, where there's a major effort. We were aware of that because the New York Times had a major feature article a few months ago and had some candidates, and we'll be contacting the Dutch people to make them aware of what we're doing and invite them to the meeting if they want to attend. Tom Zuckerman's comments were interesting from the perspective that if you're looking at the Delta holistically, the rewetting issue and for some areas is not as important. For example, a lot of land has already lost most of its organic soil, so that it presents a different set of challenges in how to deal with that. And then one topic that we recognized as being important to the Delta organic soils is the greenhouse gas emissions. And he pointed out that some of the farmers are moving to higher ground and planting vines and trees, so they're actually sequestering carbon in their farming efforts. So I think we have to think a little bit more about the scope of what we want to cover. Agriculture is obviously an important component of dealing with organic soils in the Delta, but there might be areas that are not organic soils that are still relevant to the general management problem. And then finally, Dennis Baldacci had a terminology question and didn't really like the phrase rewetting when what we're doing is flooding the soils. But what he raises basically the challenge of coming up with the appropriate terminology here. And Christine and I are starting to make a list of alternative titles that's still growing. But I think that's going to be a challenge for us to come up with a title that meets all the disciplines, because as probably many of you are aware, when you go off and deal with other disciplines, sometimes the terminology gets defined differently. So that we're going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with that issue. But I think there's a pretty good chance our title will be changing. We're definitely not using subsidence reversal as the final title for the workshop. And let's see, I guess at this point, I should open it up for discussion. Did anyone else have another reaction to the comments? Obi?
I read the comments actually, and in Tom Zuckerman's letter, I see a sentence that says the major problem may be correcting itself. And I wasn't clear how we came to that conclusion. Do you? Are you?
Yeah, I didn't talk to Tom, so I'm not clear exactly what he meant. I don't know that it's correcting itself. It's definitely a piece of it that's going in the right direction.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Anyway, I just was surprised about that statement, that sentence. And I also thought that student from Stanford gave some good ideas, I think. And the recommendation for the Dutch science. Thanks.
Tanya?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on Tom's comment as well, Tom Zuckerman's public comment. I think it raises some interesting questions maybe about whether we can include in the workshop that we do or in the review somehow this landscape scale assessment of what we know about the challenges of mitigating greenhouse gases. In particular at a landscape scale, and how we think about that when we're dealing with different types of land uses within the Delta, and then different types of land uses for the purposes of addressing subsidence and rewetting. So something like that might be useful for us to just make sure we're addressing. If we aren't already.
Yeah.
And now I can't remember what we have for our full list of topics.
Yeah. No, the fourth panel is the landscape scale issue, and we're still filling in the subjects that meet the criteria of landscape scale. I think the second panel, which is focused on greenhouse gases, is a more topical panel.
Yeah, there might be some intersections there as
yeah. It's clear we've got to do some head scratching. Lisa?
Yeah, I guess this is a related comment to Tanya's. As you're thinking, I mean, as someone who studies agriculture and all the various incentives of why farmers are incentivized to do different things, it feels like it may be adding a lot to your scope. I imagine, I think of the dealing with the subsidence as the hub of your analysis, and you have all these peripheral issues that can either help or hurt that dealing with that. But if you start expanding it to what's the best way to sequester carbon, it could take you a little out of scope. So I was just going to caution against getting too broad, because it's fairly complex and may distract.
Yeah, the caution is duly noted. Diane?
So I wanted to comment, reading those 3 public comments. I felt like, we have this brief synopsis of our workshop, but it doesn't have a map. We don't have a visual, and that's something that can really help keep everyone on the same page. We talk about, in the first paragraph, 386, I think, square miles impacted. And then we have 80,000 acres that are being managed for rewetting, and just having a map that we can carry through, and maybe address Tom Zuckerman's comment by having a sense of how big, how do these areas where there are soils that have already lost all their organic soil and are now being managed with trees and vines, how big is that? How big a percentage? So I just wanted to share that thought about how it could be beneficial to have some visual that we build on. We've seen lots of maps of the Delta, but we might need our own simple but map. So thanks.
Well, certainly in the review itself, the maps would be appropriate. I guess I'd turn to Edmund and maybe Lauren. I don't recall graphics in earlier prospectuses.
That is correct.
Okay. We don't have a formal policy though. We just haven't done it, right?
Tom, I want to remind you that we have some informed public commenters waiting to comment.
Okay. Does anyone else on the board have a comment? Okay, let's go to the public comments.
Yes, we have 2 public comments lined up for the subsidence reversal. Subsidence review. Sorry, Tom. I know. One from Gilbert Casio and one from Deirdre Desjardins. So we'll go in the order that I called the names. If you haven't introduced yourself to the board before, feel free to briefly introduce yourself before providing your public comment, but this is optional. All right, Gilbert, you have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Thanks, Edmund. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Gilbert Casio. I'm with River Delta Consulting. I've been an engineer for levee reclamation districts for 40 years, and I've worked with, I think, 46 different reclamation districts as their engineer for throughout my career. And as a result, it's about half the Delta. And so I've been involved a lot with subsidence and geotechnical engineering and whatnot. So I plan to submit written comments, but thank you, and I appreciate the fact that we can actually add some oral comments now to kind of get you thinking about what I and others may say in our written comments. I'll keep mine today limited to the levies. I guess my basic question that I think needs to be answered is whether subsidence reversal or subsidence halting is really a viable option for considering future levee stability. I know when it gets thrown out at meetings, I think a lot of people assume that, yeah, subsidence reversal is going to stabilize levees. And I think if we have 100 years to wait, that might be the case, but because of the situation the levees are in now, we don't really have that much time. But I appreciate the fact that you guys are looking at this, and some of the comments and questions that are coming up after the written comments you received is indicative of how complex this is. And it's complex because you're taking the very academic efforts that scientists have been studying for years, and then combining it with where the rubber meets the road. Those of us that are the practitioners that have to put that into play in real life. And I harken back to the 2016 workshop that ISB put together, did a really good job taking the science of seismicity and high water and levee stability and brought it together in July of 2016 for a great workshop. And the proceedings that were published afterwards are a great source now for people to look back at that and then understand, okay, what's the latest and greatest in science matched with the latest and greatest in practicality. And that's what I hope to see in this upcoming process. The one thing I wanted to mention is that you really got to think of what's been called the zone of influence, that these levees and subsidence, the influence that subsidence has on levees is kind of limited to a certain area, about 500 feet from the levee toe. And that was proven out in Bulletin 19282, in the CalFed record decision, in their subsidence appendix. They talk a lot about this zone of influence. And so, whereas some continued subsidence or maybe even reversal may be beneficial, there's kind of a limited zone that it does take effect and affect levies. So just be thinking of that as we go along, that's going to be one of our concerns, is how viable is it going to be as an option for increasing levee stability. No doubt halting subsidence near a levee is important. In fact, in 1988, when SB 34 was reauthorized, one of the appropriate eligible costs was the cost to buy easements along levees to limit farming, knowing that continued farming causes subsidence. And then along the same lines, we're allowed to use borrow material from inside the island, but we can't take it within 400 feet. So even back in 1988, when SB 34 was passed, the zone of influence is really important to levee stability, and pretty much not as important once you get outside that zone of influence. So I'll kind of stop my comments there, but I'm looking forward to submitting my written comments and working with you in the next year and a half to come up with a really nice, usable document. Thank you.
Yeah, Gil, thank you very much for those comments. And I look forward to the written comments. Yeah, I mean, just because we're talking about it in the prospectus doesn't necessarily predetermine the conclusion. Our hope is that this will be a bona fide workshop where we'll be able to discuss these kinds of issues. And, you know, maybe we'll conclude that the subsidence reversal aspect is, like you said, is not that, is not the solution to the problem. And hopefully the recommendations from the workshop would educate the people who have to make those kind of decisions as to what works and what doesn't. But again, thank you very much for helping us define the problem here.
All right, next up is Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
I wanted to thank Tom and folks working on subsidence reversal for being so open and really trying to listen to the Delta levy folks. I think it's going to make for a much stronger review. They really have a lot of knowledge. I did also want to say, I would really suggest thinking about climate change and the possibility that some of these islands are really vulnerable. And as I said in my comments, I don't think our investments for upgrading levees are keeping up with climate change. There are some improvements in the governor's budget this year, but there may be some flooding of islands and then some recovery. And I think looking at how resilient projects would be might be a good idea. Because I'm starting to get concerned about investments in various kinds of habitat restoration projects and how resilient those are actually going to be in to flooding. And subsidence reversal is sort of an extension. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. Yeah, I mean, climate change obviously is going to be a big part of the discussion here. It's going to be challenging though, because we don't want to make climate change the focus of the workshop. The focus is, you know, how the delta is going to be changing with respect to water. It's just going to get wetter as water levels rise. Yeah.
All right, there are no additional public comments. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so our plan at this point is to incorporate the comments, come up with several alternative titles, and then get our working subgroup together and thrash out sort of a final prospectus and title. And we're simultaneously simultaneously working on potential panelists for the workshop. The idea of the workshop is to have experts talking at the beginning, but then have a vigorous public discussion on the topic, so that it'll be very much a working effort. And hopefully we'll be able to schedule the workshop in October to coincide with our face-to-face meeting of the board, to make it easy for members to attend. Any other public comments?
There are none.
Okay. I think that concludes what I have to say.
Thank you, Tom. So that's great that you're already close to scheduling that workshop. We look forward to seeing the final prospectus and those plans. Well, we're actually due for a little break now. So let's take a 10-minute break and return about 10 minutes before the hour. And see you soon.
Late from the break.
Oh, okay. Didn't realize that. Good. You've got more intel than I do. Great. So let's go ahead and start. Folks who make that happen.
Yep, just wait for the okay from Anthony before you start. Okay, Anthony, are you there?
Yes. Yeah, we're all set to go.
Thank you.
Devices are rolling and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Anthony. Okay, folks, welcome back. I know that Steve is chomping at the bit to get to item number 5, which is the food webs review. And Steve's going to do the same thing that Tom did in discussing public comments and opening up for board discussion. So thanks, Steve.
Well, thanks, Lisa. I don't really know if I'm chopping at the bit, but I'd like to bring you up to date on the food webs review. We released the prospectus on April 20th and are seeking public comment. The deadline for public comment is May 31st. And as with the Subsidence review, we have circulated this very widely through IEP, the California Water Quality Monitoring Council, Delta Listserv, the Delta E-News, Maven's Notebook, and so forth. And we do encourage you to please submit your comments to us so we can make this a really productive workshop. We did get one public comment already. It's in your packet from Brett Harvey from the California Department of Water Resources. And this is exactly the sort of public comment that is really valuable to us. He provides some suggestions regarding literature and potential workshop speakers and topics. And this has been very valuable. Of course, we're aware of some of these folks, Jim Peterson and Adam Duarte, and his two of the folks he recommended are in my department. So I know their work very well. And also Cyril Mitchell, he gave a strong recommendation for. He's a fellow who gave a seminar at our university a couple of weeks ago talking about salmon habitats in the Delta, which I attended and had a chance to talk with him. So his work clearly aligns with the kind of work we're doing. So I thank Brett for that particular recommendation and encourage others to provide their public comments as well. I guess any members of the board that want to react to this public comment further? Okay, the status of the workshop planning, we have set the dates for a 2-day workshop somewhere between August 16th and 19th. The idea is to have 2 full days, which will be a combination of presentations and panels and breakout sessions. Before that time, we're also having some meetings with stakeholder groups, particularly from a wide variety of perspectives, to try and get some input on the 7 overarching questions that we initially drafted in the prospectus. Want to look at those questions and make sure we're covering the topics in such a way and the breadth of topics that our recommendations in the end will be of use. And so we want to make this workshop valuable. We're having those discussions. We're also planning at our June meeting to have an open forum for the public to provide a discussion with us on where we stand on the workshop by that time. By June, we plan to have a draft agenda out. We'll have a conceptual figure of what we're thinking about in terms of how things work and what might be important. But we want to have, we invite everyone to that open forum so we can have sort of an open discussion on the workshop and refine it as necessary to make it a valuable contribution to the Delta during the workshop. And I think that's a brief rundown of where we're at. Bob, did you have anything to add or?
Well, nothing really to add, Steve. I think we're kind of at the threshold of really moving forward very quickly now, especially with the discussions coming up over the next couple of weeks. One thing I wanted to, I guess, say to you, Steve, is that I've been working on the figure that we may include in the document and will also be used to kick off the workshop. And I've been trying to come up with a figure that it would be standalone. It would convey the message we want to get out there without having any captions would not really be necessary. So I'll send that to you either later today or tomorrow, early tomorrow, and just see what you think. But anyway, I think it's something will be really important for orienting everyone. But I think also at the same time, probably you and I and the others on as part of the discussion group, we should really, I guess, make sure that we're all in agreement on what that figure should look like and what it should contain. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. As background for other folks, is we found in some of the past reviews we've been able to put together, in essence, a conceptual figure to highlight maybe the overall process and to highlight why we think what we're reviewing is important. And I particularly recall that in the invasives invasives report. We have that, but we also had it in the monitoring as well in terms of the adaptive management framework for adaptive monitoring. So those kind of things are valuable ways to provide that input. I forgot to mention that we are currently, the public comment we got is valuable because we are currently in the process of coming up with a list of possible speakers and topics to cover. So if you have any of those recommendations, get them to us, and we're compiling them right now and beginning to put things together. So I think, Lisa, that's all we have, unless any board members have any other thoughts, questions. And then I guess we can go to public comment, Edmund, if there are any.
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that you make a conscious effort to include environmental and fishing group stakeholders in discussions, because I know previous discussions have tended to primarily include state agencies and water agency folks, and it's not the complete group of stakeholders. Just so you all know, all of the environmental and fishing group stakeholders resigned from the collaborative science and adaptive management program because they were so furious and unhappy about the voluntary agreement consultation process and how exclusionary it was and how their concerns weren't addressed. So there's major division.
I lost sound. Did everyone else lose sound?
Yeah.
Yeah, we lost Deirdre. I'm going to follow up with her by email to see what's going on.
Okay. Well, I want to, Deirdre's not here, but I want to thank her for that suggestion. I know we have some NGOs on our list, and I think that, fishing groups are particularly probably relevant for this particular type of a workshop. Any other public comment, Edmund?
There are none.
Okay, that concludes this topic, Lisa.
Okay, well, we're making record time. Let's see, and you don't have lots of different titles, just Tom. So Tom maybe needs to hold a contest or something for best title, I think. So see what you get.
Thank you. That reminds me, we do have a title that's over 23 or about 23 words. So I think we probably need to refine that a bit. So we'll take any suggestions you want to give us.
Sounds good. We'll think about it. Okay. All right. So that leads us to our next agenda item, which is the decision-making under deep uncertainty review. And I'll take the lead on that, but I'll certainly give other folks a chance to comment. So since the last meeting, the draft prospectus was revised based on the discussion about how to better define what DMDU is and isn't, and just make it really clear that it has very practical applications. And we hope we did that. We did release that either 1 or 2 days ago, and the public comments are due on June 26th. Prior to this meeting, we did receive one public comment that we can discuss now, and that was a comment from the law offices of Michael Brodsky. And I just want to say we appreciate this email. Michael Brodsky raises many salient points about how modeling limitations are often acknowledged, but then forgotten when the results are discussed and the results are treated as if they were facts. He notes that when you're trying to represent a very complex system such as the Delta in a model, and you have to make assumptions that simplify the system, and there's a lot of choices to be made about how you represent those systems, this can create bias in model behavior and results. And so he asks, can the ISB develop a rigorous and systematic approach to assessing bias in mathematical models and inputs used to model Bay Delta outcomes? So, and I will give other people a chance to comment, but when I read that, my first thought was, we're addressing that to a small degree, but really Laurel Larson and the group that's promoting the collaboratory has really taken this on as an issue. And so I asked Laurel Larson if she would comment on this, and I knew she was going to be at this modeling meeting, so she wasn't able to stay on for our meeting. So I have a written comment from her that I'm now going to read. And in Laurel's typical fashion, she's very enthusiastic, and it has several parts, so hang in there. Okay, so what she notes is that some of the decision-making under deep uncertainty tools that will be addressed in the seminar series are going to compensate for, are intended to describe how they can compensate for inherent uncertainties, biases, and flawed assumptions in models by really through the workflow in which investigators look at the spread of model projections, and then they deliberately select conditions outside of those outcomes to consider the management implications. And for example, you can look at potential extreme conditions that the models are not able to capture. So that is often a bias of hydrologic models. So, and I'm adding in some of my own comments here, so it's not 100% Laurel at this point. Okay, so back to Laurel. Quantifying model biases and evaluating which assumptions might be flawed is really outside the scope of the DMDU effort, but these tasks fall squarely within the scope of the modeling collaboratory that the Delta Science Program is working to develop. Our aim is to develop tools that facilitate access to and understanding of models, including understanding of their assumptions and weaknesses. And these tools promote the ability to integrate and link models that investigators can use to compare outcomes resulting from different models with different sets of assumptions and uncertainties. So these tools should allow for generating ensembles or collections or sets of model results that can be used to identify biases of individual models and conditions under which modeling results have the highest uncertainty. And I'll just add, it's not perfect, but it certainly gets at the question. Another important component of the collaboratory will be human resources, such as stakeholder engagement specialists that facilitate a participatory modeling approach. In our work thus far in focus groups for the Delta Adapts and the Salinity Management Workshop Series, we have heard strong desires among groups of stakeholders to relax certain assumptions in models like CalSim, and we hope to be responsive to those desires. We recently worked with a team led by Ted Grantham of UC Berkeley to develop a greater than $8 million proposal to fund the first steps of the collaboratory, including funding the time of software developers who could help create more flexible versions of these key models. Last, I wish to respond to your comments on artificial intelligence and machine learning, as my research group at Berkeley is highly relevant. Their work is highly relevant. We are working with deep learning tools for generating streamflow forecasts and are finding that by and large, deep learning models outperform models of physical processes and are less biased based on the performance metrics that explicitly measure bias. But in certain times and places, they can do very poorly, and it's also uncertain how they will perform through non-stationarity, meaning, they're still trained on historic data. We don't know how they'll respond to changing conditions. And that's why those deep learning models are not yet adopted operationally by agencies. But she says that multiple students in her group are working with various strategies to integrate physical process understanding with these deep learning or AI tools to produce models that are more accurate, less biased, and more trustable. I assume she means higher confidence. One promising frontier is to examine outputs of physical process models with a deep learning model to effectively learn the ways in which the physical models produce biased outcomes and correct for them. And her student, Salem Adera, demonstrated this strategy in a collaborative study with the San Francisco Public Utility Commission on Alameda Creek, one of the water sources for San Francisco. And she says she has a manuscript coming out soon that she hopes to be able to share in a few months. So I think, that what she's saying there is that there are other things that are looking at that, but we will take this comment into consideration and certainly look for ways to emphasize this issue in our seminar series and think about how we can do that. So we do appreciate that comment. And now I want to make sure, Tanya, Obey, who have also been thinking hard about this, do you have anything you'd like to add? Yes, Obey.
Yeah, regarding the public comment, I think it's an important point that's raised, something we need to keep in mind during our deliberations on this topic. But I like to, my understanding is that we need to separate the hydrologic modeling from climate modeling. In terms of hydrologic modeling, DWR has regional models that have been calibrated under historical conditions. So a couple of uncertainties there would be, will they work, will they perform in a similar way under future condition hydrologically, but also system itself might change. In our discussion, we discussed this idea of all these forest fires changing the watershed itself, and the runoff characteristics might change. So those are some real uncertainties we need to think about in formulating our scenarios. The other aspect of, I separate the climate model. The climate models are notoriously underskilled in our experience for climate extremes. Now they are bias corrected. So we need to kind of keep that inherent bias in climate models, particularly under future, for extremes. And that might is something we need to think about. That might not be, we might not be able to fix by, let's say, deep learning or other techniques, but I think what Laura mentioned is highly, useful, combining physics-informed AI processes is something that we're working on right now.
Thanks, Obey. Could you just repeat that last term, physics-informed? What did you say?
This is what they call, in fact, we are writing a proposal to work with other AI institutes funded by NSF. There are three things that we are thinking of. One is the physics-informed AI, and what they call explainable AI, basically AI models to be explained by our understanding of the system, and the robust and also understanding the uncertainty of the AI predictions. So there are several aspects of combining this, physically based model with the AI approaches.
I see. So it's a little more hybrid than just dumping all the
Right,
data and
right.
getting a black box answer. Okay.
Exactly.
Great. Any other comments? Yeah, and I do also just want to emphasize that we tried to narrow, this is such a huge topic and there's so many issues with using models to project the future that we've really tried to focus a lot on the use of scenarios in our scoping. So that's one reason why we're limited in how, whether we could really quantify anything about model bias, but we are certainly supporting other efforts that are going to get farther. Tom.
Yeah, I may be repeating some of what you said. This came up in the water supply reliability review, and I sort of separated it into two categories. One, there's the challenge of estimating uncertainty itself, which is an engineering problem. But another equally important problem, and I think this is in part what the attorney was referring to, is the managers just don't understand the models well enough to understand the uncertainty in them. And that education process is probably a lot different than just trying to get uncertainty right. So that I look at it as two different boxes in my experience.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tom. Obey?
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I think it's a sort of communication issue with, and we've run into that a lot with the decision makers, try to separate the uncertainties and communicate that well with the decision makers. But what I wanted to point out is just a clarification. The other comment that we have in there, for some reason, the address link it does not work on one of the public comments, the links that's in there, just kind of point out, I don't know if anybody else try to open it up. The one on California flooding.
Yeah, I might have had an earlier link, but I was able to see that.
Oh, you
But
are?
we'll make
Okay.
sure. We'll make sure you get a copy of that.
Yeah. It says you are not allowed to preview drafts. And I try to open it. But anyway, I'm sure I
Okay.
like to look
She
at
may
it.
have sent a link to a paywall, a website with a paywall. Okay. Okay, so I think yeah, we've definitely discussed that issue, and we appreciate that comment. Are there any other comments from the board? And if not, we'll go to public comments. Okay, Edmund, do we have any public
Yes,
comments?
we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. So Deirdre, feel free to provide your comment for this agenda item, and afterwards you're welcome to finish up your comments before you lost power. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And as you know, I recently spent about 9 months doing a really extensive literature review on emerging climate science. I did want to say, so what they found recently is Amy Clement, who's been researching Atlantic multi-decadal variability for decades, recently found that most of the forcing, most of the variability since 1950 is actually due to anthropogenic causes, aerosols and greenhouse gas emissions. And I found a paper which showed that there's heat waves in the North Pacific and that variability in sea surface temperatures in the North Pacific, again, have been forced first by aerosols and then by greenhouse gases. At Amy's talk, her paper's in preprint, she said results are coming out on Pacific decadal variability, again, indicating that it may have been mostly forced in recent decades. So I'm looking for that paper as well. It would be an absolute tectonic shift in our understanding of decadal variability in climate. Its major influences on California precipitation, the Pacific decadal variability. There was a much wetter period from 1977 to 1999, and then it's been drier since then. So I'm working on a synthesis of that. What I anticipated when I was doing research, there's been some, and pulling together a synthesis, there's been some new research that's come out. I think it's absolutely critically important that the Delta Independent Science Board consider this leading research and the implications. And I apologize, I'll get you the link. The other thing I'm concerned about is that the Delta lead scientists grant applications appear to be influencing what the Delta Independent Science Board considers and doesn't consider. And it's not that you're supposed to be doing your oversight completely independently of the Delta Science Program. So I'm going to write a formal letter to the Delta lead scientist and ask that she, since she is being involved in your review and what you consider and won't consider, that she fully disclose any conflicts of interest that she has. Because it is very unusual for a lead scientist to be involved in so many major grant applications. at academic institutions. And the USGS ethics office did look at this earlier. So it's something that really needs to be looked at because, you know, the Delta Independent Science Board's reviews need to be independent of financial and other influence. That's the I in independent. Every one of you has to make disclosures of conflicts of interest. If the Delta Independent Science Board, the Delta lead scientist is advising you on what's in scope and what out of scope, which experts to consult, then that absolutely needs to be disclosed with the same rigorous standard that you use for your own disclosures. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Deirdre. I just would like to respond a little bit to your last comment. I feel that we are truly independent. I would not at all characterize the Delta lead scientist input as telling us what's in scope or out of scope. So I think as she is a stakeholder that can contribute and make suggestions, but we have many stakeholders giving us other perspectives. So I'm just not sure that's really a concern. We're happy, you know, we've enjoyed our working with her, but I don't think in any way her research drives what we do. And perhaps this stems a little bit from how I read her email in response to that public comment about the DMDU. It was really more that I wanted to show that other people are working on the issue because we are not. And it was convenient to have her provide that background because there's some, you know, interesting work going on. So anyway, I appreciate that. Appreciate your concerns about the decadal variability and how much anthropogenic forcing is going on. And we'll certainly look for that link you're going to send. So I think Obe wants to get in here too.
I had to unmute first. I want to kind of respond to Deirdre's comment on Amy Clement's work and the role of AMO. And there's a similar issue on the Southeast United States on the AMO. And Amy is kind of next door to us. And I assembled a panel of experts recently to discuss the very issue of AMO influence or relationship to hydrology within the state of Florida. So what I'm hearing is that in the 60s, there might have been some influence of aerosols and other, you know, volcanic activity, but maybe in the last 2 or 3 decades, the forcing due to warming kind of takes over. So in going into the future, it could be both affecting, and that's where the deep uncertainty issue may come in. You know, we cannot predict some of those things, and we may need to think about scenarios that includes both natural variability and the forcing effects. But I think there's a lot of emphasis on the AMO in the last 10, 15 years. Even Michael Mann has reversed his suggestion that it's not simply a natural variability. It could be partly due to forcing. So that's kind of familiar with some of those literature you mentioned. Thanks.
Any other comments?
If I might follow up, I'll send the board. Michael Mann did recently call for people to consider that the recent La Nina trends in the tropical Pacific, the models don't capture them. And that's another thing we're looking at.
Okay, thanks, Deirdre. Okay, and I just want to announce that we do have our next seminar series coming up next month in the DMDU series. So our second seminar series is going to feature Robert Lempert, who's a principal researcher at the RAND Corporation and director of the Frederick Pardee Center for Longer Range Global Policy and the Future Human Condition. He'll discuss an overview of DMDU and present examples and successful applications of DMDU tools. He is working in California, and really brings a long history of working with these approaches with various groups. So we're very excited to have him. And we're also excited that he will be joined by Andrew Schwartz of the State Water Project Climate Action, who's the State Water Project Climate Action Coordinator for California Department of Water Resources. And he's going to talk about how they're using DMDU within his department. And it's certainly very enlightening to see what they've been able to apply so far. And so that seminar is going to be on June 15th from 1 to 2:30, and there'll be an in-person and virtual option. And so we're leaving a little extra time because we have 2 speakers and we're hoping for an engaged conversation and a flyer for that seminar as part of your meeting package. So any comments or questions about that? And I'll also double check about any new public comments since I didn't wait till the end of the topic. No, okay. Edmund, any other public comments?
No additional public comments. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, well, now we move on to agenda item number 7, which is preparing for the upcoming ISB meetings. So the meeting, so that seminar will be part of our meeting, and which will run from June 14th to the 16th. On day 1, we'll be getting council report, Delta ISB chairs report, and the council is Executive Officer Virginia Medueno, I believe, has joined us. Yes, she'll be providing her update. I'll give my update. Laurel Larson will give, as the Delta lead scientist, will oh no, she's not going to give an update. We're going to talk about recruitment. Possibly Kyra's going to give a presentation. I think that, yeah, we're hoping that Kyra can give a presentation a little bit more about her background and research. There's we'll try to schedule this structured decision-making talk that Laura Larson brought up from CSAM. We'll be finalizing the prospectuses. We'll be talking about the science needs assessment, which is another activity that's almost completed. And we'll have that seminar in the afternoon. On day 2, we finally get out onto the Delta by boat, where the USGS has generously offered to provide us with a boat tour to help us understand the hydrology and hydraulics of the Delta, get a view of the central Delta and those levees from a boat, and just increase our understanding of how water quality works and how Frank's tract works. And then on day 3, we will have some public committee meetings for Subsidence and DMDU in the early morning. We'll be talking about the seminar, and for DMDU, we'll be talking about the seminar series and the research component. So that is our plan. And then we're also looking forward to later in the fall. As I said, we have Kyra giving a deeper intro of her. And then as the postdocs are rounding out their first year, we're looking for them to provide some reflections, probably at the September meeting, but we're going to play that by ear. And then we'll see what other activities we have going on in July and August as things firm up. So at this point, I think I hand it over to Edmund, if you want to give us a review of any action items, follow-up items.
Yeah, and just for the record, there's no public comments for the preparation for upcoming meetings. And I do want to add for the agenda for June, there's going to be an open forum and discussion on prospectuses for current reviews. And then Bob just raised his hand. I'm not sure if it was for the upcoming meeting agenda item.
Oh, yeah, Bob.
It is. I was wondering, have you decided on a date for the July meeting yet? I know there was some discussion of moving it.
Yeah, we have a tentative date right now. It doesn't work for a few individuals, so we're still looking for a date. And then the other complicating factors, we're also looking into a DMDU seminar, so we have not finalized the date for that yet. Okay. Besides the tentative date, if we can't find a new date, it'll be the tentative date on July 14th.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, so now I'll move forward to the next agenda item, the item for follow-up, and I'll report out on next steps. So during the Delta Lead Scientist report, there was interest in getting a presentation from CSAMP on structured decision-making for Delta Smelt. So Laura will follow up on that and then schedule a presentation for a future meeting. There was interest in any writing material, anything written that the ISB can review beforehand. And then Laurel suggested the Hendricks publication. So we'll send that to the individual ISB members and it'll be part of your meeting package for your next meeting. In terms of reviews, Subsidence is working to address public comments. Public comments are due on May 31st, and there could be a revised prospectus for discussion at your June meeting. Some of the things that they discussed today was coming up with a new title, and the Subsidence review leads are also working on an agenda. Similarly for FoodWebs, they are working to address public comments, which are also due on May 31st. They are planning an open forum for the next meeting to get feedback on the draft workshop agenda and a conceptual figure. And then for individual ISB members, based off the draft prospectus, if you have recommendations for speakers, please send them to staff. For DMDU, the public comment period for the draft prospectus just started, but they'll work on addressing the public comments received. And then public comments are due on June 26th for that review. And then members of the public are also welcome to come to the June 14th meeting to provide oral comments. And then for that, the review leads are just preparing for the upcoming seminar on June 14th. Did I miss any items for follow-up?
I think you brushed over it really quickly, but just I want to clarify that we had two potential future agenda items, one being the structured decision-making and one being the Delta Science Program's grand challenges approach. So just want to clarify that.
Yes. All right, anything else? If not, this concludes the follow-up items, and I don't see any public comments for item. Oh, we do have one from Deirdre, and Dan. Deirdre, feel free to provide your comment.
One, I will send an updated link. I apologize about the blog post link. I accidentally copied from a preview. And two, I wanted to ask if the board might consider using a format for Zoom meetings that the State Water Resources Control Board uses, where the full gallery of members is available and the speaker video is also provided. It's much more equitable and inclusive than a framework where one only sees the speaker and public commenters aren't, you never see their faces. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Deirdre. We'll look into that. Okay, and so then we also, do we have any public comment on things not on the agenda? Perhaps that was the public comment on things not on the agenda.
I believe there are no public comments not on the agenda.
Okay, great. Oh yeah, that was a future meeting comment. Okay, got it. All right, well then I believe that concludes things. Any last comments or concerns that anyone on the board wants to bring up? Hearing none, I conclude this meeting and we'll see you in June.